Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Recover You. Patrick is not here today, but I am not alone this episode. I have the beautiful Amanda Testa. So let me do a quick intro. Amanda is a trusted healer, coach, and guide who served hundreds of clients over the years with masterful skills in coaching, pleasure embodiment, and somatic trauma resolution. Her clients tenderly heal their relationship with their sexuality, shamelessly embrace pleasure, own their sexy confidence, and cultivate deeply connected relationships with her fiercely loving support. You are very fiercely loving, very compassionate, empathetic person. When
Thank
she's
you.
not leading transformative sessions, you can find her snuggling her spunky 11-year-old, flirting with her sexy hubs, playing in nature, enjoying live music, and having epic conversations about sex with fellow experts on her Find Your Feminine Fire podcast. So, welcome, Amanda, and thank you for coming on to continue the always difficult conversations around sex.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, and
Yeah.
even just naming that right off the bat, maybe just, ensuring that as you're listening or just maybe it's doing something to take extra care of yourself, right? As always, it's always just a nice little added thing to maybe just look around and think, what can I do to make my environment a little bit more enjoyable, just even right now, right?
Hmm.
Take a breath, whatever you might need.
Yes. Yes, because today we're going to talk about sex specifically, which we have been talking about in some of the other episodes, but specifically related around the idea of trauma. And so
Mm.
I think that's a great idea. Make sure you're comfy and make sure that this is, first of all, an appropriate topic for you. So I've mentioned that too in like another episode, like know at this point in your recovery journey and where you're at, like if this is going to be an appropriate conversation for you on the podcast. And if it's not, that's okay. We have lots of other episodes you can listen to and you can come back to this when it's time. Um, but yeah, I'm so glad to have you on. So we had a conversation once and you had said, "Yeah, I'm not a fan of porn." And I'm like, "Oh, it's so nice to have like a sex coach and relationship coach that's like not, because sometimes I think in that realm we go, "Oh, they just think everything goes." And I think your perspective is so much more on deepening intimacy and deepening connection between the partnership. And when we worked together, my experience was so much that your focus was so much on creating safety. And you're so compassionate for the place that I was in, which at the time that I was working with you was within the first year. And it was actually, I think maybe like within the first four months when I reached out and connected to you. And I was like, this is going to be a problem for me. And you never pushed me beyond my personal readiness or my personal boundaries in this area because I really at that point it was such a stuck place for me and it was so difficult and I had such a complex relationship with my body and with sex and intimacy at that time and so soon after betrayal and finding out just everything so you were just always so compassionate and meeting me sort of where I was and offering such gentle exercises. And I remember one specifically, I think it was my favorite one, was this visualization that you had. Specifically, I think it was focused on bringing positive energy into my pelvic floor, like and my pelvic bowl. And I think there was like a honey pot that we filled with positive things and we poured it into my pelvic area and just so many things like that. And so I just want to start out by thanking you for your part in my journey and for just being an awesome human who talks about these things and who helps people through these things and for doing what you do.
Thank you. I received that. I'm just celebrating you too, because we were actually just talking before we started recording, just like this is not an easy road and not sugarcoating that, but also there is post-traumatic growth, which I think is what I really want to just remind everyone like that is possible. And so, and I
Mhm.
think too around sex and trauma, there's so much interconnected and it's such a challenging road. But like you say, when you can find a way to approach it that is at the right speed for you, that is
Mhm.
not pushing you at all, it's all about doability.
Mm.
There, you take the baby steps, right? And step by step, you find your way back to yourself, to what brings you joy, to connecting with your body in ways that feel good and all those things.
I love that you mentioned that the way you said that because I think so often And maybe you see this with people that you work with as well. I think we so often put a timeline on it because we have expectations around wanting to have sex, right? Wanting to feel connected with our partner. And then also expectations around, well, I have so much information, I have so much knowledge, or my partner's done so much healing work or whatever. I should be healing faster, right? What are your thoughts around sort of ditching the timeline and really respecting your body and like your perspective on that and healing in that area?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it's true, not only because we put pressure on ourselves, but I think just society in general, if we identify as women, that we are often the ones that are viewed as like, well, we like are kind of leading the ship in the relationship and we need to be the ones. And, there's so much pressure on us to make things right or to move on or whatever it is. And it's just a bunch
Mm.
of BS, in my opinion, right? Because then we put pressure on ourselves and, you know,
Yeah.
it doesn't work. It does not work because we can only go as fast as the slowest part of us is willing to go. And often that,
Ooh.
yeah. And
Yeah.
often
Say
when we
that
work,
again.
yeah, we can only go as fast as the slowest part of us is willing to go.
Mm.
And I think that is one of the hardest parts about this work sometimes is that frustration that comes with being patient and just like trusting
Yeah.
the process and trusting the growth that will happen. Because oftentimes a lot of it's underneath the surface.
Mm.
Right? So maybe you're doing a lot of work and you're like, "Oh, why is this still so hard?" Or why am I still so triggered and all these things. And then realizing one day, like the sneaky, powerful work over time, one day you're all of a sudden like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
I just had an experience that usually would totally trigger me. And now I'm like, wow, that actually I didn't have that same response. Or
Yeah.
so I think that's important to know. And also too, our brain is a very fast wavelength, right? We think and we want to think our way out of things or like read our way out of things and like
Mm.
all the things, but really our wavelength of our body is way slower. And oftentimes that's got to catch up
Oh, that is
with the
such an
changes our brains want to
interesting.
make.
I've never really thought about that actually, that our brain and our bodies would have different frequencies and wavelengths and energies. I mean, it makes sense. My if I think about it in my personal body, I'm like, my brain is very fast and very active, and my body not so much. So that actually, I mean, very much resonates with me, but I've never really thought about it in those terms. I have thought about it in the terms of you never want to override like your nervous system or move faster, than your nervous system is ready because correct me if I'm wrong, but that would be a trauma to your body as well. And then that's you choosing sometimes unconsciously to do that. And that
Yeah.
can make it harder and go even slower.
And I would just say, the number one thing to keep in mind, I feel like the number one key is compassion for
Mhm.
ourselves.
Oh, I think you just muted or
Sorry,
cut out for a
compassion
second.
for
Yep.
ourselves and to really honor like we might do that and that's okay. But
Mhm.
we learn and but it reminds me I like to do this kind of example of working out, right? Say for example, you haven't worked out in a long time and you're all excited to go to the gym and you pick up these heavy weights, you're like, "Yes." And then you do some bicep curls and the next day you're like, "I don't know what I did, but I did something and now I've got this terrible tendonitis in my elbow and now I can't even work out at all." Right?
Mhm.
It's that type of thing. Similarly with our nervous system, like we have to just, we sometimes might realize, like, well, that was too much, but that's okay. We can just forgive ourselves and go back and be like, okay, I'll go a little bit slower next time. Or maybe I want to tune in a little bit more to the real truth of what I need in that moment. Right.
Mm. Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective and kind of what back to what you were saying earlier as well, because there were so many times I think where I felt so broken because I was like, why am I not moving faster at this? What's wrong with me that I feel so stuck or that I'm taking it so slowly? And I think we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves for so many reasons after betrayal, right? And it's like, I just want to be fixed. I just want to be back to what I might perceive as normal or whatever goal it is that I have. It's like I want to hit that yesterday. you know? Um, and there was a lot of frustration, I think, on my part, for that, and a lot of self-reflection, kind of, why am I the way I am with this when other people aren't? And I'm sure so many things play into that. I know my own history and my own, different experiences that I've had sort
Mm,
of piled up to my response.
Right. And I will, and I think that's one of the great things about the work that you do and just educating people in general on how betrayal trauma can really affect our sexuality and so many different aspects of
Mhm.
ourselves, right? Because one of my mentors, Rachel Maddox, shares this definition of trauma, which I really like. She calls it's an embodied violation hangover,
Mm.
right? So in some way you were violated and your body is really feeling it and reeling from it. And, it can impact a lot of different things, right? Our sexual desire, our sexual response, our overall sexual health, the connection between pain and our emotional response is very complex. And a lot of that is tied together. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of different aspects to it, right? Not only physically, physiologically, emotionally. So, I think just even to educating yourself on how, it's normal that that's happening. Like, even when you don't like it, it's very common that, the way you respond sexually changes after betrayal trauma, right?
Mm.
So just to name
Yeah.
that.
Oh, well, I think that's so helpful to just as a reminder that it's normal, right? I think so many of us can I was like you look at other people and you compare your response and you're like, but I should be maybe over here or I wish I was over here. And so just normalizing stress and trauma and betrayal, everyone is going to respond slightly differently to those experiences. Um and how your body and your brain and your openness to intimacy and openness towards sexuality after that is going to be very different as well. I know when we were working together, a lot of it was focused on sort of reconnecting with my body in a healthy way. And kind of talking about this idea of not pushing it too quickly and everyone's response being a little bit different. Can you talk about what's that look like? What's the foundation of sort of reconnecting to your own body, or your perception of sex or intimacy when there is something that historically maybe has hurt us, or there are different shame messages around it or fear around it because of the things that have happened?
Yeah. I really think that's a great question. And one of the reasons why I think having a lot of self compassion is key as we rebuild this connection to our bodies is because it can be very common that we just disassociate from our bodies. Like we don't really want to be in there,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're like, this is a coping mechanism often, right? And sometimes it's really healthy. You're like, wow, first of all, it's really thanking your body for taking care of you in that way, right? You
Mm.
just couldn't be there and you needed to go away. That's great. And it can really, it happens a lot around sex too. And so that's a very common thing. And so maybe that also shows up as a disinterest in sex or inability to find pleasure or just not even, you know, not being present at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when we can find like a road back to connect to our bodies. It's very powerful because, and at first it might be hard to want to reconnect, but we can kind of learn the language of our body, which is called interoception, which is kind of understanding like, okay, what are the sensations that I'm feeling in my body? Is there a temperature that I'm noticing? Is it numbness? Is it pain? Is it, you know, tickly? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it like expansive? Does it feel contractive? Like kind of learning the language of our bodies and how things show up can help us understand more like what it's telling us. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, maybe there is the thought of a sexual experience comes to mind or even moving towards that. And immediately you're like, I can just feel my body just constricting and it's like a vice. Like that can often happen, right? And so it's just noticing, well, taking the time for you to kind of be with understanding what that message is. And
Yeah.
oftentimes, a lot of the work that I do with clients is around somatic experiencing. And so it's really giving, you don't have to relive anything, right? But it's just noticing, okay, as you have that thought, what might you be experiencing? And giving your body the chance to maybe unwind any stuck stress might be there. So,
Mm.
for example, I can share kind of an example of this that makes it a little easier to understand sometimes. So say, for example, you hear a loud noise to the right and you want to turn your head to the right, right? But you don't let yourself turn to the right. So, like, feel just what that feels like to really want to turn to the right and really want to know what's there, but you just can't.
Mm.
And then imagine holding that for 10 years, 2 years, right? That like response of wanting to do that never got to complete. And so maybe there's that like stuckness that comes up. And so what that can look like is like, okay, well, what if you just kind of notice what could it be like to turn your head and let your head do what it wants to do? That's that's kind of an example of how stuck things can show up in your body. So, say, for example, a lot of times there's pelvic pain or even like vaginismus where your body just won't open and your muscles contract and close and it's involuntary, right? It's beyond our control. And so, oftentimes, that, there's lots of things you can do to work with that. There's lots of things you can do to heal and to move forward if that is happening. But the reason why we want to find the things that make us feel good, find the things that we enjoy in our physical body, it kind of opens the pathways to more pleasure, because pleasure and pain are they both originate in the same place in the brain. And so when we can kind of start to remember the pathways to what feels good, then it's easier to go down those pathways. And so it can start really wide. So oftentimes I think, if we're looking at our sexual selves, one of my teachers, Ma Ananda Sarita, talks about like the stairwell kind of thing. So there's this big, wide spiral staircase, and then and how it's very wide at the top, and then spirals around. And as it spirals around, it gets tinier and tinier. And like at the very bottom of the spiral staircase, that might be your sexuality, right? Your sexual organs or whatnot. But when we're talking about sexuality, we want to think about even the house, even the whole landscape of this environment in which the staircase lives, because we want to make sure, like, what is our environment like? Is it an environment that I enjoy? Do I feel safe in this environment? And what can I do to like create these more pockets of safety in my environment? Starting outside, working your way in, right? So it's like, maybe, what are the foods that I enjoy eating? Do I even know what that is? Right? What are the smells I enjoy smelling? What are there certain types of fabrics that I like to wear or that I don't? And maybe I'm sitting here wearing these really uncomfortable pantyhose and I'm like, forget that. I'm done with pantyhose, right? But
Such a
like,
good example, yeah.
yeah. So it's like
There's
these,
so
yeah,
much in what you just said, I think, where I love that you use the word safety, because I talk about that so much in terms of moving forward in a relationship. Like, that's the foundation of your ability to reconnect, and that would be the foundation of your ability to reconnect sexually as well. You've got to have that safety there. But I love what you're saying, even even within just yourself, offering that safety and compassion within your own body, outside of even your partner, and making sure that um I call them like pro you choices. Like, you're going to make pro Amanda choices today, right? And so that is sort of coming back to kind of what you're saying, is like, what do I like? What do I need? What's going to help me feel safe today? What's going to help me feel grounded today? And it makes me think of the movie Runaway Bride, when Julia Roberts doesn't know what kind of eggs she likes. And sometimes we just go about, like you're saying, like living life, like doing these things because we think we're expected to do them, or it's become a pattern, or maybe it was a trauma response at some point and then it became a pattern or whatever. And so now I think when you're choosing recovery and you're choosing health, there's a real opportunity to step into this version of yourself that's way more authentic and way more aligned and grounded, maybe even than before betrayal, and before you were hurt in this way. And so you even doing that within your body, like you were saying, like, what is it that I like? Do I even feel comfortable giving myself a hug? Like, am I somebody that feels comfortable being touched? Is it okay if other people hug me? Like, because I think sometimes we go from zero to intercourse and it's like, okay, but can we touch hands and feel okay with that with each other? Like, is there intimacy there?
yes, I think that's so
Is there
huge.
safety there too?
Yes. And
Mhm.
that's kind of one of the reasons why, like, when you can connect with your own body first and kind of even learning, like, what does a yes in my body feel like? What does a no in my body feel like? And it really helps to regain a sense of trust, because that is often really shattered after betrayal, not only your ability to trust others, but also your ability to trust yourself. So when you can
Mhm.
make those small choices to take care of yourself, it's that reminder, oh, wait, I can trust myself. I'm
Mhm.
thirsty. I'm drinking water. I can trust myself. Ooh, I really do love cuties. And they're really in season right now. So I'm going to go buy 2 huge bags and enjoy all my cuties. And then I'm like, yes, I can trust that I know what I want. Or, you know what? I really don't need a cup of coffee. I'm just going to say no to that because I know it'll just make me feel too jittery. And you're like, yes, see, I can listen to what I'm needing. And like, those little things are huge. And it also pertains to our sexuality too, because then you can kind of feel, what does it feel like in my body when I'm like a full yes to something
Mhm.
and I really want to lean in? And what about when I'm a no and I'm just like want space?
Yeah.
And so then when you can feel into that, it becomes more, it definitely goes
Mm.
hand in hand with sex, because then you can feel in like, what might I need to feel okay to move closer? What are the things that I
Yes.
need? Yeah.
Yes. And so for me, uh so there's a for me, I as I was moving through it step by step, there would still be sometimes slight discomfort in terms of, okay, this is the next layer that I'm ready for. But so much safety had been provided. There was most of me was going, But this is the right next step. Like there's safety here. This is what I want to do." But because it's new again, there's a fear here, and that's different and important, I think, to recognize. Then it's not safe for me. It's not the right time for me. And so I think that does take what you're talking about of tapping into your body and really knowing, really understanding what it's trying to communicate to you. Because discomfort in the terms of nervousness or feeling like, "Oh, I'm being brave doing this," is maybe a little bit different than, "This is not safe and this is not the right time."
Exactly. That is such a great point to name, because it is a courageous thing, right? To brush up against that fear or the resistance and noticing like, is this a true no, or is it just like my pattern?
Mm,
And like, and then kind of discerning that, which it
mhm.
takes practice, but then you can get better at doing, like you were saying, like, well, this is a safe environment. I am feeling good. All my needs are being met. I am feeling okay with this. Of course, part of me is scared and nervous, but what if we just take one little step and notice how that feels? Or what if we just do the
Yes.
one next move and notice how that feels?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Knowing that I can stop at any time I want, right?
Well, and that too is so important, right? I think sometimes, again, it's like, okay, well, 0 to intercourse, or if I start, I'm not allowed to say no or what. So maybe we talk a little bit here about communication and boundaries with your partner and making sure that that safety aspect is so present in this experience of reconnecting.
I think that's really huge, because really, that creating that sense of intimacy
Mhm.
where you feel emotionally connected, where you feel like your needs matter, where you feel like you aren't rushed. And I know that sometimes is really hard. And I think it's a lot education too for the partner to understand going slow is important. Being able to stop whenever is needed is important. And sometimes that
Mhm.
can feel frustrating for everyone, but also it's so important to know like, you cannot push, you cannot force, because that extra pressure is even harder, right? As you're
Yeah.
trying to move past. And so I just say that is, even just being able to communicate that, understanding as you move through the healing process, sex might look different.
Mhm.
Maybe there's other ways of connecting physically that feel really good that don't involve penetration, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there's other things that you can explore as build the safety and build the trust back to where you want to do more.
Mhm.
And
And that
also,
was so much our process,
mhm,
was baby stepping it. One piece at a time, and I sort of would come and say, "Okay, this is what I'm comfortable with next." And we would actually very much approach it like trauma exercises. So, in a sense, the first, like these different phases that we take, a lot of them were not about sexual gratification in that moment. It was, "Okay, I'm doing this because this is a trauma processing exercise for me." And that allowed both of us to come in with a different sense of safety doing it, and maybe a little bit of a, I don't want to say lack of expectation in a way, but sort of, where he was able to be very present and intentional about whatever step we were on, because he knew the importance of it, and that it, like, the end game with most of those steps was not necessarily to go to intercourse and have an
right.
orgasm or all those kinds of things. It was like, okay, this is the step that we're on. Let's make sure that this step feels safe.
And I think really I love creating the environment where sexual exploration can be like a healing playground.
Mhm.
So, because it's having that reverence for whatever comes up for either partner. If there's emotion, if
Mm,
there's pain, if there's release, that you can pause and hold each other as you experience that,
yeah.
right? Hold each other through what's coming up, because there's so much often trapped in our bodies around that.
Mhm.
And so it's even noticing, like, oh, I'm noticing, like, I need to stop right now. Can I pause? And having whatever experience you need to have, whether that's a release of some sort, whether that's tears, whether that's just like I need to talk about this or whatever,
Yeah.
pausing. And then when you feel ready, then reconnecting
Mm.
and seeing what's next. Right.
Yeah, and I think I wanna clarify this point as well because I think it's easy to think about this being a big need on the betrayed partner side. But we have to remember that a guy or any addict that's going through recovery can have a lot of negative associations with orgasm, with sex, with their feelings around sex. They might have shame around their body. They might feel like they don't deserve to connect with you after hurting you in this way. So there's a lot that they can actually bring because so much of their um experience and association and negative self-beliefs around it up until this point, this may be and actually I think a lot of times because addiction is an intimacy disorder, and so I think a lot of times this is the first time that a sex addict is actually learning intimacy and learning how to connect to their partner while they're processing and releasing shame. And so I think there's a lot there too, and I think it's really important to acknowledge like this isn't necessarily just on the betrayed side. There can be a lot of overwhelm, a lot of fear, a lot of insecurity on their side as well.
That's so true. And
Yeah.
I mean, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of the teaching that I have studied with for a decade and that I like to bring in is around really conscious sacred sexuality, because it's like taking it to a new level. It's not, it's like a connection that allows for whatever is there to be witnessed and presenced with compassion, because it doesn't always, I think that's one of the things too, is we get such an altered view about what sex really is, or what it looks like on TV, or what it looks like in the movies or whatever. And
Mhm.
it's so unrealistic, right? And so when we can kind of just be like, what if this is just a playground for whatever comes up, and not
Yeah.
judge ourselves? Like, what if one of us has a meltdown? What if one of us needs to scream? What if one of us wants to punch the pillow for a few minutes? What if one of us needs to like
Yeah.
really enjoy it? Like, what if we really enjoy it? What if we can find like
Yeah.
the also like have being gentle on yourself, and sometimes inviting in playfulness can really help with the stress of it all, right?
Mhm.
Because we have to be gentle on ourselves, and sometimes there can be some really funny experiences that happen along the way
Oh
too,
gosh,
right?
yeah. Funny, embarrassing, awkward, all of the above. Good. Yeah, absolutely. How would you encourage couples to maybe begin or open conversations around this? Maybe that have a history of this is not something we talk about in our relationship. So maybe let's say before discovery, before everything's come out, they might have thought, oh, we have like a normal sex life. We kind of go in, we do this physical thing, but we don't really talk about it. And then this comes out and they've been forced to have really awkward conversations. And now they're like, okay, I don't know how to you know, now we're looking for how do we be vulnerable with each other? How do we actually connect with each other? How do we talk about these really uncomfortable things? So, do you have any suggestions for either things to make sure that we cover in our conversations or ways to bring this up and create a space where we can openly discuss?
That is such a huge point, and it is a very oftentimes awkward thing, because it's so funny how many, I mean, it's not funny, but like I can't even tell you how many couples come to me and they're like have great connection around everything, but this one area they cannot talk about. And it's
Mm,
so common because it is so shamed and there's so much taboo wrapped up in it. And so the
mm,
first step that I always invite people to do is really to take a look at your own sexual story, right? So take some time on your own, and each of you do this. So both partners would take some time and write down, okay, what are the things I learned about sex coming along? What were the lessons? What were my experiences? Were they positive or negative? What did I learn coming along? And what was my culture telling me? What was my family telling me? Maybe what was my community telling me? This, that, and the other.
mm,
And really getting clear on that, so you can kind of see, where am I coming from in all this?
mhm,
And even just naming that, like, and then also as you do that, maybe there's shame that comes up, maybe there's like fear. And so even letting those perspectives speak. So if your shame around sex could talk, what would be all the things it would say? Maybe it's like, oh, I have this like old church lady living inside of me, and she's like, you're going to go to hell. You cannot touch your body in that way. Everyone that's, like all these things that might be coming up, right? Letting
I
that,
so love that you brought that up. It's so true. It's so common. Okay, the two things like hit me. First of all, it just resonated with me the way you just worded that shame around sex is a part because I'll do like parts work, right, with my clients and stuff like that. And I'm like, shame around sex is a part. So that's a fascinating sort of connection and way to think about dealing with it because you can talk to that part and create safety and compassion and stuff like that. But the second part is like that part might, when you're looking at parts, you always create like, what do they look like? What version is it? It's an old church lady who's like shaking her fist and Bible thumping you about sex, right?
I'm speaking from my own personal
No,
experience
I
there.
hear you.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, such a common one, which is why we have such a hard time talking about it, right? Because I think even if nobody ever explicitly said this, in some cultures or communities, there's an idea that like sex is for procreation. Or a lot of times is pushed is that men need it, women don't. It's your job to give it to them, right? And so either one of those really destroys this mutual connection of safety and
Yes.
intimacy.
And if you think with that last example you spoke, if that is the case in a betrayal situation too, then there's even much more pressure on the woman to be like, well, I better pull it together. And that stress, which is not going to work.
Mhm.
Anyways, but so I think when both of you take the time to kind of reflect, and then you can come to each other with even starting sharing your stories, like, what did you learn? Because then you can kind of have empathy for one another. And what was it like for you? And really
Mhm.
listening to what
Mhm.
your partner has to share about what did they learn coming along. And maybe what if there was some magical environment that you could have grown up in where this was like a celebrated thing and
Mm.
everyone was like cheering you on as you grew into maturity and like teaching you really safe and sacred ways to honor your body and pleasure and connect with someone in a really loving, present, conscious way. Right? What would you have loved to have learned? And then
Oh
you
my
can talk about
gosh.
that, right? So it's starting with those kind of conversations,
Mhm.
and then maybe it could bring, then from there it can bridge the gap eventually to bring in more like, well, what would we love to see in our relationship more? Like what are the things that, what are your fears around it? What
Yeah.
are your desires around it?
Mhm.
And having those conversations starting from that place.
Mhm. Oh man, there's so much within this. And I think about, difficult conversations are usually the conversations that need to be had with a frequency and commitment of we're going to keep doing this until it's not uncomfortable to talk about anymore, right? Until this is so safe. And I think about that with my own journey. Right? Like when I started working with you, I was not talking as openly and freely and using the same terminology that I am today. Like it was very different. So now I'm talking about it so openly, and it's like there's just been so much healing, but that took a lot of practice and a lot of intentionality and a lot of like moving through and doing so much of this healing. When we think about, and I'd like to hear your perspective a little bit maybe more deeply on the difference between physical interaction versus establishing intimacy with your partner, and how that intimacy like maybe even improves or changes, or it just is it such a different experience but with the physicality. But to that point, one of the exercises that you had given us that was just really beautiful and not and non-sexual but just really beautiful was for Patrick to talk to my different parts and to offer love and to my body. And and he would. So he would talk to like my breasts one day, or he would talk to like my uterus one day. And then I think one time he like talked to my vagina or like whatever. And oh my gosh, like the process of him doing that was for both of us was such a great process of him talking to my body and offering it. And he would, the way he did it too was so cool because he would say things like, gosh, this was so long ago, I'm trying to remember, but he would say things to the effect of like, "It's okay, you're safe, like, I love you and I appreciate you," and whatever it was, whatever words he was using to kind of express that and create that safety there, right? And he's like,
Mhm.
he would say things like, "I know that you're scared," talking to my different parts, and I was like, but it was just, I mean, just such a like, who thinks about doing that? It's just like, I don't think I had ever heard about that concept, and that was such a beautiful thing. So, I think that's a great example too of, like, it's not even intercourse necessarily, but, like, that's a what a connecting exercise to do and a healing
Mhm.
exercise when you have so much pain around this area to connect and be vulnerable with each other like that.
Mhm. It is so powerful to really honor all the different aspects of our bodies and beings and the consciousness within them, right?
Mhm.
And I think because, like you say too, it's like letting all the different parts of you know, like, I'm here and I am willing and I am not going to push you, right? So
Mhm.
even like, and sometimes it can be, I love this example too, because you're kind of talking about the difference, I think, between like sex and intimacy a little bit,
Yeah.
and how oftentimes when we think about sex, we are just thinking like a specific physical interaction,
Mhm.
right? Like maybe it's strictly physical, maybe it involves intercourse, maybe it involves other types of like physical touch. But that is also something that can occur without intimacy at all, right? And
Right.
so, but intimacy, on the other hand, it involves this deep sense of closeness, of trust, presence, of connection, and it extends beyond just physical to emotional and intellectual and even spiritual and beyond. And so that's what, like, a big part of building intimacy is creating these like practices where you can connect.
Mhm.
And oftentimes that can be a good bridge too to build towards more physical forms of connection, because you are building that sense of safety, building that sense of trust, um, and you know finding that closeness
How
in
do you
ways that you do feel more comfortable being physical.
Yeah, and maybe that just answered the question. I was gonna say, how do you think that that impacts the physical, like, let's say you're doing the exact same thing, but one has intimacy. Like, how do you think that's going to change that
I mean,
experience?
so there's definitely a lot more. I feel like there's more of a sacred connection, right? I really love the term sacred union, because I think it's so
Yeah.
beautiful of like really when you love someone and you want that connection, and it's a special union between you and your partner, that is can be such a healing experience. It can be a place to really allow all your vulnerabilities to be witnessed and held. That's the key part, being held. So when you have the ability to know, like, we have an emotional connection, we can talk about our issues, we can share it and honor each other's boundaries. That when
Mm,
you have that kind of intimacy and closeness, when you bring the physical act of sex into that, it just makes it so much more rewarding, I think, for the parties involved, right?
yeah.
Because they are being seen at a deeper level, they're connecting at a deeper level, they are holding space for each other at a deeper level.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think too, even just the idea of when you have that intimacy and that connection being present, um so thinking about like the addiction side of it, right? And you mentioned like dissociation earlier, and we talked about shame and stuff like that. This might actually be one of the first times that they're totally present with their partner in a way that is just so different than any sort of physical sexual encounter they may have had in the past. And for the betrayed partner, again, kind of the same thing, right? If your partner is present, being fully seen, both of you, I think, having that experience of being fully seen and valued and loved in a way that is just so different. And I think that too can have an impact even on how the body responds, right? That extra layer of I'm being seen, I'm totally safe. We've had these conversations, we've had this connection. Speaking of connection, Patrick is like really good at like energy. Can I just say he's like really like he can he can like whoosh, like this sounds weird, but he like whoosh me with his energy and I can literally feel it. So it's just a very interesting um I don't know, I guess I would use the word connection in that area,
Yeah.
and, so that's kind of a cool thing to experience as well. It's like if you've never tried to connect to your partner's energy, like doing some exercises
Mm-hmm.
around that can be really, really cool.
Yes, energy can be such a fun thing. I love playing with energy, and sexual energy can be delicious. And everybody has kind of a different flavor or erotic persona, so to speak, of what they like, but really kind of learning that around each other. I think that's one of the beautiful things about when you open up to this deeper connection and closeness and safety, then that is when sex can become so much more than
Mm,
just a physical act. Can become like just this, that's where you can find ways to deepen it that lasts a lifetime, right? Because there's so many different things you can learn. There's so many different aspects of things that you can explore,
yeah.
right? Like playing with energy and how that can sometimes feel so amazing. And you're not
Mhm,
even touching, right?
mhm. Oh, yeah, one time he was, because we'll just sometimes be like, let me send you energy or, whatever. And so one time he did it and, I was like, "Were you, like, pulsing it? Was it coming in waves?" And he was like, "How did you feel that?" And I was like, I can tell, like, you're really good at it." Like, his
I
energy
love
is, like,
that.
very strong, like,
Mhm,
and I guess I'm really receptive to it, I don't know, but,
mhm, mhm.
it's just that's such a cool thing, I don't know, I love that
Yeah.
stuff.
And I think the
Okay.
other cool thing about that, I will just name this too, because the other
Yeah.
cool thing, and I think this is a really important thing to note, is because most of us never really were taught to work with our sexual energy and our desire in ways that are nourishing to our systems.
Mm.
That is why so many people have often been taught, like, if we have sexual energy, it needs to go outwards, it needs to go somewhere. When really
Mm.
you can use your sexual energy to nourish your own body, which that's more of an advanced practice. But I think if every young person would learn this, there'd be a lot less seeking it externally, right? Like
Oh,
really
yeah.
using it to nourish your own body. Yeah.
Oh, you're getting into, like, recycling your own energy patterns and, like, the circuit within yeah, that stuff is it's very, very cool and interesting and fascinating, yes. Okay, so with the time that we have left, I think I would really love it if you could touch on the topic of hyper and hyposexuality as a trauma response. It's a really big question in the betrayal community. It's a really common response to go either way, and I think in some instances there's healthy versions of it and unhealthy versions of it, right? Like you may naturally be a little more hyposexual for a while you're establishing boundaries and seeing like, is my partner going to betray me again? Right. Like that might be a really healthy space for you to be in during a season. Over time, if it turns into I haven't had connection with my partner in this way in a really long time and now I'm really scared of it, then that may have turned into something that's unhealthy, right? And so what is your experience sort of seeing these as trauma responses and what plays into those decisions and our subconscious sort of like pushing us one way or another, and do you have any thoughts on finding the healing and the healthy middle?
I mean, it's very common after a betrayal trauma that you do have these altered effects on your desire. And so, um, for example, you were just mentioning about hyposexuality, which is really a decrease in sexual desire, or hypersexuality, which is an increase in sexual desire, just for those listening who might not know. But a lot of times they both can stem from an ability, like really wanting to try to control, right? Trying
Mm,
to control pain, trying to cope, trying to regain control in some form, trying to disconnect from what happened. And so that's a big part of it. And I think too, when it comes to, dealing with each of those, there's kind of unique ways of playing with what's coming up. So oftentimes, what commonly happens is there's a hypo response, which means there is a decrease in sexual desire, which can be more about like dissociating, avoiding, all the things that go along with that. And it can happen from on both sides, where there's, the cause is similar, but the result or the behavior is different.
mm-hmm,
And so I think that's one of the things too when it comes to working with hyposexuality specifically, that's when really kind of learning to connect with the body
mm-hmm.
and learning how to find accessible ways to listen to what you need, right? Because you're not wanting to go there at all, right? You're
Yeah,
not
and
wanting to go there at all when there's hyposexuality.
that would be probably a good example of people have different thought processes on this, and that's okay if you agree or disagree with us.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
um, that is an example, I think, when people are super hypo, where sometimes for women, self pleasuring is actually like a trauma recovery tool as they are creating safety in their own body and almost retraining it that it's okay
Yeah.
to have those feelings again.
Hmm. I think so. And that's why, I mean, a lot of the times when you're ready, and this is again, it's a building up process of like really remembering what are the things that I need to move towards what makes me feel good,
Hmm.
to be more present in my body, to be more present in my experiences. What do I
Hmm.
need to warm up to these experiences?
Hmm.
And from there, sometimes it is, and then you can even add in what is like some conscious self pleasure practices that you could bring in to build that connection and to
Hmm.
trust your own self and how you approach your body so that
Hmm.
it's easier to communicate to your partner around that too.
Hmm.
Because sometimes it's even like, well, I can trust that I can go the speed my body needs.
Hmm.
Or now I can trust that I know actually what I even like in my body. Because most of us has never been taught that. I work with so many women, and this is just the general population that don't understand their own anatomy or don't understand how pleasure works in their body. And so it's normal, right?
Yeah.
And specifically when there's like pain or disconnection, or just like I've showed up for myself and I'm still feeling nothing, and I just want to give up.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, what are the places that might feel good? Right. What if, does it feel good to like hold your own hand? Like you were saying, can I give my own self a hug?
Mm-hmm.
Can I hold my chest and my heart? If not, okay, what
Oh,
about, can
that
I
just
massage my
reminded
feet? Can I
yeah,
massage my feet? Right.
that just reminded me of another exercise you had given me that I loved so much, and that was the heart opening exercise. And again, non-sexual, but I'd be like standing in the shower and I'd be doing the heart opening exercise, and it was literally a physical movement with like an emotional intention about opening my heart center.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, I mean, it sounds like, "How can that help?" Right? But it does, and you feel the energy moving. It's so fascinating, like, some of these things that seem so small, but
Mm-hmm.
can have such an impact.
Yeah. And I think slowing down is great for both of these options, because even if it's hypersexuality and you're like
Mhm,
really feeling way more desire, and just like often that is an acting out too of like what is beneath that? Like what is the need underneath that is trying to be met? Is it
mhm,
because you want to feel like, there can be a million things, like, but tuning in, what is the need beneath that behavior? And
mhm,
slowing down, like, okay, I'm about to, what is it that I really want underneath this?
mhm.
And is this the best way to get that in this moment? Maybe it is, maybe it's not, right? But it's just slowing down to tune in. What is it that I really need beneath this?
Yeah, I think that's such an important point because, when we can drop in, there may even be a healthier way to get that. In one of the other episodes, I've talked about the idea that, if sex is the only way you're feeling connected to your partner, it's usually indicative of a disconnect in the relationship. And so, if like you were mentioning earlier, it's like when you can work on the intimacy and the connection and the trust and the safety and the communication and the boundaries and all of these things that go around interacting physically, then that can be this natural, safe, beautiful expression of all of these other interactions that you've had as a couple, this expression of the totality of your relationship at that point. Yeah.
For sure.
Well, thank you so much for all of your thoughts and expertise. Is there anything else that you think would be an important message around this topic to share today?
Well, I think just first of all, as I mentioned before, just having compassion for yourself and honoring your speed, honoring what you need. And really, I would say like that is such an important thing to tune into, because so often we are just so disconnected from that in general. And
Hmm.
as especially if you're listening and you're identify as a woman, so often we are so worried about pleasing everyone else and taking care of everyone else's needs that we forget what ours are. And so I would just say, as you move through this process, remember like your needs and desires are very important. And so just keeping track of what those are, right? Just really staying committed to your own compassion for yourself and like honoring your needs above all else is what I would say.
I love that. No, thank you for reminding us of that because sometimes you'll hear this perspective that, oh, focusing on myself is so selfish, but I think you have to be healthy and aligned in order to have um good connection with other people, in order to have the energy to show up effectively in all of your other relationships and activities in life. And so if you are running on empty, like that's not going to help anyone long term. And so I actually think that's such a good point to remember. You've got to nourish yourself so that you have the strength, the ability, the
Mhm.
capability, the energy, all of those things to connect the way you want to and show up the way you want to in the rest of the world.
Yes, that's so true. The connection is just the best. Thank you.
Amanda, where can people connect with you? And if they're interested in and they feel like they're in a good place in their healing journey and they want to maybe work with you and kind of connect in this area, like how do people find you and tell us all the places and all the things?
Yes, thank you. Well, you can find me at my website. It is Amanda Testa, TESTA.com, like take a test with an A at the end. And I also have a lot of free resources if you go to amandatesta.com/the goods. And so there is a lot of information there. And there is a place there as well. If you did want to, just explore if working together is right, then you can always, I always am happy to consult people there. And I also have a podcast, Find Your Feminine Fire. So those are the places you can find me. Yeah.
Yay. Well, thank you so much for being here and for everything you do and just for being awesome.
Yes. Thank you too, Kylene. So good to see you.